So what's up? So I just made this, and it is actually, for as long as I've been woodworking, my first cutting board, and it's supposed to be one of the most complicated ones to make. So I'm gonna show you how I made it in my little tiny shop here. Let's get it. I'm gonna take it with me. So we're gonna be using this 8/4 walnut, this 8/4 maple, and just to make things interesting, I'll be throwing in some 8/4 cherry randomly. Why? Because I like cherry, and I need to get rid of this piece of wood. So let's see what we can come up with. So we're going to start out this by doing a whole lot of math. And a lot more math. And a lot more math. The problem with these boards is they take a lot of multiple cuts. You have to cut across, then you have to cut down. And so we'll go ahead and take them to the miter saw. Go ahead and make my cuts down to 12 inches. So I've got my board all cut up into 10-inch strips. This is going to be a 12-inch wide board. So if you're wondering why I only cut 10 inches, when you're doing your math on your board size, you've got to remember when you're doing one of these brick pattern cutting boards, you've got to add in the 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, or whatever you're going to make the mortar, which for me is going to be the maple. So while this is only 9 inches, once you start putting this in there, suddenly this is 10 inches right here. So that's going to be our size right there. You add the cherry in there, and suddenly it's going to be 20 inches wide. Once the maple starts going in the grooves coming the other way, that's going to also add length and width. So yeah, that's a lot of talking, but these boards are kind of complicated. There's multiple cuts and measurements that have to be exactly right. And we're going to go ahead and clean these boards up to 3 inches wide. And I'm going to try not to trip over saying brick pattern cutting board again. So everything's cut. This is kind of going to be the base pattern for this. So we'll just go ahead, get this in the glue up, and see what we end up with. So I'm not going to bore you with how long this took to glue up, but I thought this part was pretty funny, and I left it in. This board decided to try to run off from me, and I ended up having to clean it completely off because there's sawdust all over my shop because I can't keep a clean shop. And we're going to go ahead and tighten this down. When doing this, make sure you don't tighten it down too much. You don't want to bow the boards, and make sure you put clamps across the top to kind of counteract the force. So this didn't turn out exactly as I'd hoped. You could see here it slipped. Maybe I didn't have the caul tight enough, but looks like these two boards on the end kind of twisted a little bit compared to the rest of them. So I'm scared to run this through the planer. So I'm going to sand this down, maybe hand plane it, and we'll see how close I can get it. And so after a little load with the belt sander and then a little bit finishing off with my finish sander, I got this cleaned up, looking pretty nice and flat. So we're going to go ahead and make our next cuts and get the strips out of the maple that we need to run across, and then we're going to cross cut this at 1.5 inches. I decided to go half the distance that the boards are wide to kind of give it that big brick pattern feel. And the maple I'm keeping at the 1/2 inch size. That way it's all consistent across. And if I got my cut right, this was just a little brush cut across the table saw just to kind of clean up the edge, make it look good. And here we're just going to test it out, make sure everything fits right, flip the pieces around, and make sure everything is lined up. This actually turned out a lot better than I expected. I was worried, especially with my small table saw, as underpowered as it is, these cuts were not going to be straight, but taking your time and cutting slowly, I did get these exactly how they need to be and back in the clamps. So again, don't over tighten and make sure you've got a good set of clamps on the top. This thing had a lot of glue squeeze out and wasn't exactly perfectly smooth. I did get it sanded down and then trim up the edges, taking very little off the edges. You don't want to take too much. Then I'm going to come in with a little bit of CA glue here, and I had a small hole to fill in on this piece of walnut, hit it with some accelerator and go. And now I'm doing my favorite trick to line up the router, just taking a straight edge, moving that router a bit up until it touches it. This kind of keeps you from getting that little line across any roundovers you do where you have to sand the edges back over. and give it a nice little round over on it. I'm using one of the Bits and Bits round over bits on this, so it cut through it quickly and smoothly. And just gives it a nice profile. You don't want those sharp edges on the side of this, because that just gives it a point where something could crack or break. And it just gives it an overall cleaner look, especially with that multiple types of wood. And you can see there, it just gives it a nice smooth edge. Here I'm going to water pop it, just kind of raise the grain after I sanded it. I sanded it up to 80, 120, and then all the way up to 220. And then I'm going to rub it down. I'm not going to spray water directly on it, but I am going to water pop myself. It is hot in Georgia right now, so I am ready for fall. I think that this week it was in the 90s and like still 80 at night. And we're going to go ahead after that water dries and just hit it with 320 real quick. Just kind of a brush over it. We're not going to mark on it. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to go as fast as possible with the vacuum on. Then hand sand the corners. I don't like running the sander this late in the game over it. It rounds over the edges too much or flattens them. So we're going to hand sand any of the corners. I'm going to wipe it clean, and then I'm going to hit it with some Bumbleshoots woodworker's oil on it. This stuff I love. I moved exclusively to using Bumbleshoots on any of my charcuterie boards or my cutting boards, or actually on anything anymore. That's all I really use is Bumbleshoots. So we're going to give it a nice finish, and you can see that cherry and that walnut really starting to pop. That's really that contrast I really, really wanted. So here we go. Brick pattern cutting board made in this tiny shop with normal tools you can pick up at a box store. The fanciest thing I used was probably my sander, and you can use a box store sander to make this. The only trick is knowing your measurements, cutting slow, and cutting accurate. And as long as you're accurate, as long as you're careful and you know your measurements, you can make something like this in the small shop. So if you want to see me keep making stuff in this small shop, new stuff, neat stuff, like and subscribe. I am trying to build a YouTube channel to show people what you can make in a tiny shop with normal everyday tools instead of high expensive stuff. So if you like it, give me a follow and I'll make more. If you got an idea for something I could build that you want to see built in a small shop, put it in the comments and we'll talk about it and I'll see if I can make it. Until next time. Oh, dropped my earbuds. That's embarrassing. Oh my God, I got to clean this shop up. I can't find anything. Where did my earbud go? There it is.